Dude, look around. Seeing how modern gaming is unfolding is like not being able to escape from an insanely over-leveled Pokemon battle. You already know how bad it's going to end up for you, but that doesn't mean you actually want to sit there and see that shit. So of course, the conversation is always going to move directional button away from all the more newer hardware one puberty phase away from evolving into a mid-tier PC rig, and instead shift its focus onto all the more retro and older consoles of past generations, with 3D games having anti-aliasing that look very funky upscaled on a 4K TV. If it's your first time hearing that, consider yourself warned by a wizard. Retro gaming reaches new player count milestones every other month, it seems, especially with things like, based emulation tactics and devices putting up heavy assists on the scoreboard. But even with that beautiful fact farming XP and retro title popularity, some players out here just gain instant restless hand syndrome at the thought of not being able to hold a pristine and original controller hooked up to the device that it was created with, retro gaming the way God intended. And with how much these older consoles can offer you right now, within less than a heartbeat, I could easily recommend that you go and pick up something like a Nintendo Wii to enjoy your time on, which when I say that, you might think of something like the standard white or black models as I, describe a Nintendo Wii to you. But dude, did you even stop to consider the Wii Mini at least? I mean, look at him. He's wait. And now you made him leave. There has been a lot of consoles that have released so far in the Earth's long ass playtime, but if you were to go to the settings and pull up the overall stat sheet, you'd see that that number of consoles ever released is greatly inflated by all the different console variants and revisions that release multiple times across just one generation, giving a single console like a handful of different multiverse Spider-Man clones of hardware. And most times this is done to make some features more convenient within a single console, like performance or an excuse to not let you own anything nowadays. But when it comes to the more retro systems, they usually have variants that get lost to time or just aren't that much known anymore unless you're leveled up past being a casual spectator and enjoyer of all the retro systems. And honestly, while all these forms of hardware are pretty much doing the exact same thing, which is, playing your game, people still do have their favorites, and the crowd that's willing to die behind stuff like the Nintendo 2DS over literally anything else out there are folks that I would love to share an elixir drink with and pick their brains one day. So there's never enough awareness and love that can still be shared towards more obscure console variants that you probably forgot about or never even knew existed. Because, dude, for some of those, you're gonna have to operate off of love entirely, because there is the chance that you might get stopped at a perpetual red light when it comes to something like a launch model Xbox 360. But before we even get that far on the timeline, we might as well briefly press F to pay respects to the forefathers of video game systems within the original line of home consoles that were ever released during the 70s and 80s, with more numbers in their names that could only rival the confusing titles of modern retro emulators. Because I'm gonna be honest, all the first few Atari and Sega consoles were pretty much spawning on store shelves every year during this period of time, like how Call of Duty drops its games right now. So classics like the Atari 2600, the Atari 5200 or 7800, all in their base forms were the only consoles to stick out from that company for anyone right now who wasn't alive to actually see them all release. Like, I wouldn't even blame you for not knowing that the Atari 5200 had a variant that only released with 2 controller ports instead of 4, or that the 2600 had a junior model that looked more like an Atari 7800. I think the 2600's wife got some explaining to do. And then the other gaming platform they were in business PvP battle with, Sega, had their SG-1000 series that never had an official American release, but overseas still received a Mark II and Mark III revision that are all ridiculously expensive to find in box on the secondary market. So if you see something under $400 right now, you can have my wizard hat, because you just might actually be the chosen one. But the point is, all all of these early gaming platforms, including their variants, shared relatively the same form factor of their time, with being these big chunky hunks of plastic builds that mostly embraced the matte coloring and sharp edge look that felt futuristic in the 80s, looking like something you see somewhere in a Fallout Surface world. But each variant, no matter how ridiculously expensive they are right now, still have their own fans based on what looks the best to players right now, or what you can remember growing up and having during that time. So no matter what stands out to you, you just cannot go anywhere wrong when you pick an early Atari or Sega system. So it goes without saying that as gaming hardware kept moving on, the capabilities of these newly released consoles were maxing out their performance levels quickly, and with that, Nintendo would be one of the first companies to put gaming on the radar of the mainstream world for both good and escaping the video game crash reasons with the NES console in 1985, which I'd argue was where the world saw its first most popular console revision so different from the original that the casual population unanimously decided to let their brains forget about it, being the NES 101, or more known, the NES Top Loader console, which is small enough for you to qualify it as a pocket gaming device. The DS was the vision. When speaking on specs, this NES model does everything the same as the original pixel cable box we all got at our grandparents' basement house right now, but just at a smaller form factor and reportedly even faster game loading. So even though this model was made to mimic the already at this point released SNES console, Nintendo undoubtedly set a domino effect for video game hardware companies to make it a standard of releasing a bite-sized version of their system with slightly better performance at the cost of, well, aesthetic. I mean, if you don't believe me, look at the mini version of the later released SNES system. It's literally that console's look after it finished its weight loss journey. So proud of him. Hell, even not so later on, PlayStation being late to the game was still smart enough to pick up on this cue to do their own slim version of the PlayStation 1 that honestly looks a lot better than the original model to many people, and actually ships with a DualShock that has joysticks on it because Sony was apparently smoking something insane in 1994. And Sony still carries this tradition, with every PlayStation console having a usually superior slim version as of this recording, with us having the PlayStation 5. Just no more slim price tag when these new consoles release, of course, since the cost saving can only be meta on their end now. But I will go out of my way to say that the worst slim variant Sony likely ever released based on experience could probably be the PlayStation 2 Slim, because as goated as that system really is, don't get me wrong, you gotta realize that at any point we're all just one reset button away from the disk drive being faulty for literally no fucking reason. It's very annoying. But even then, the original PlayStation 2 fat still had its fair share of long-term issues, so either way you slice it, you still run the same types of risk on each model, so you might as well just choose your favorite. And man, even with Sega in the late 90s into the early 2000s, when their business was blinking red on low HP, they were still able to make a smaller, old school CD player looking Sega Genesis with its Model 3 revision, a console variant that is kinda held back by it only having mono audio output, which can be annoying depending on how much you're blasting Sonic 3's dope ass soundtrack, but still a fan favorite that gives a whole new convenience to an already good console. Because that's what you ultimately get within all these smaller models acting as sequel DLC to their original hardware release. Less space taken up, usually better quality performance, and possibly something that's reduced or taken away in the name of price cuts. A concept more dead right now than Latin language. Like, it's cool to be objective and all about comparing console revisions and which one performs the best, but people just gotta remember that it's no real point in counting out all of those lesser known consoles unless it's genuinely necessary to do so, like jumping while you sprint in video games, because man, on a few occasions, we have seen some of those less popular variants have quality that are damn near PlayStation essential for you to even enjoy using the console at all in a gaming capacity, mainly within the tricky era of the 7th gen systems with Xbox and PlayStation. I think you can feel me when I say that both the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 launch models carry the most aura as far as their design goes when you look back on this generation, but when you mini-map zoom in on what's under the hood of these actual systems, it gets pretty obvious that the engineers of that time were biting off more than they could chew with their components chosen, because you had to pick your fighter of either the Xbox Red Ring of Death that led to the biggest recall ever within broken systems that cost Microsoft over $1 billion to compensate, or the PlayStation 3 Fat that wasn't terrible for the time hardware speaking, but has a serious heating issue and is usually the model with the most long-term problems. Choosing between these fighters is like picking leftovers after your main and second favorite Smash characters has already been chosen. Either way, it's gonna be ass. So redesigns for this generation were practically inevitable, like subscriptions in gaming, and people forget that the Xbox 360 got so freaking many different releases in its one lifespan that one of their revisions had their own variants. Like the original released Fat model had an arcade, core, and elite edition that mostly boiled down to just more storage capacity and slightly different color variants that were absolutely the peak of Xbox creativity. My bad, I might have just triggered a modern Xbox fan to start crying. And then of course when you zoom out and look at the 360's other major revisions, you got the Xbox 360 Slim, which has the more, wedged in design along with a quieter output, and then of course the much preferred Xbox 360E, which is the version that came out last from the 360's gigantic ass family tree. I'd hate to be at that family reunion. Each console slightly improving upon the last one, but it seems that the credit of nostalgia and player reception mostly goes to the first and the last versions of that console release, but everything in between is very much valid too, since some people grew up with these obscure revisions without even knowing it and still do think the world of it, or just think they're better looking when seeing them now with how expansive the option you have to choose from is. Just like with the PlayStation 3. Now this console only got 2 other major revisions outside of its first release, and most people really only care for the second one, which is the Slim version, since it marked when the console was actually affordable and not a life-changing decision on your wallet, but also it's just genuinely better than the original Fat model in every way conceivable, except for backwards compatibility support. Legally. But then real late into the PlayStation 3's lifespan, we were also surprised with the release of the admittedly very cheaper design of the PlayStation 3 Super Slim that had a manually operated disk drive and used more budget plastic on its exterior than what you'd find in a toy aisle. Again, not the most popular version, and many folks don't even know that this Ruffles chip texture thing even exists with how late it released, but it still is the most efficient PlayStation 3 on paper and was easily the cheapest one to find back then and right now, so it's no reason to think any less of it as a worthy PlayStation 3 console despite its design. Truthfully, the only time a console redesign can be justifiably thought less of is when their manufacturers take away key features in the sake of cost cutting, but without adding anything, like with the later release Xbox One S being the first console to see what would happen if you took away a disk drive and only let you download the games, the Wii Family Edition not having backwards compatibility for GameCube and not having a vertical stand, the Wii Mini not having get back here. Why didn't you catch it? The Wii Mini not having Wi-Fi capability while Nintendo still supported it back then, and of course literally anything to do with 9th gen consoles right now, since there's compromises all across the damn board that we're forced to live with in this day and age. When main defining features are taken away from a system and then that same system is presented to the public as a new thing that they want you to buy, you also just take away the interest of many gamers who will potentially buy into that console, which can be bad for sales, but at the end of the day, still amazing for niche groups of gamers, since it just makes those systems that people don't want all the more lucrative and cheaper and give a sense of pride to the folks who truly do like those platforms and call them home to their house of games for that generation. So, man, I just think that you gotta always take into account that the most important types of console revisions in these trying times are the silent ones that pretty much all consoles have at some point, whether you see it or not, where the internals or software gets changed over the years, like with the Sega Dreamcast or the Nintendo 64 that only got those types of new versions during their time. But this only matters to most people now because when it comes to both retro and modern consoles, knowing which specific silent console revision you have goes a long way in preserving it past its official support date ends, so that you are setting yourself up perfectly to mod your console. Like, the Nintendo Switch's original release model is hella sought after these days, even though it's practically the same as every other base Nintendo Switch, since it is substantially easier to install custom firmware on those devices than it is on the Silent Red Box re-release that the console got in 2019, where nothing on the surface changed for the console, but anyone up to nefarious activity at that time was sitting like James Stokes in the car trying to figure out how something was just not right. Every console has a finite number of years left to exist in its prime, whether you want to count online servers, disk drive rock, or just a better piece of hardware releasing later on. So I might as well just send you off with a reminder that I don't condone anything illegal, but I still can't blame you for getting ahead of the curve of possible lost media in the future. So no matter how you want to tackle that think piece, I just think that it'll be much easier when you can learn to accept all forms of forgotten console revisions and learn that they all do the same thing, no matter how different they can possibly be. And that's all that I got for today, man. If you enjoyed, leave a like on the video, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.